Okay, so this could be an introduction of the topic that Aleksandrs will cover. At the moment, he's studying in Delft University. He's a master program student, and he has graduated with a diploma, with merits, and he previously was a student of the Latvian University, the Urban Planning and Architecture Department. I must apologize. I'll be reading my speech. Latvian is not my native language, and this presentation was created in English, so please don't mind me talking this way. So, hello. At the moment, I'm working for the Chief Architect's Office. So, the diversification of residential areas is the master's thesis that I developed in the Delft University, and the one that allowed me to graduate as an urban planning expert from Delft University. So, I will be talking about the problems or the barriers, obstacles towards the revitalization of residential areas. And I will talk about these problems and analysis that I've conducted on these problems and what is the relationship between these problems. So basically, the idea is to introduce new functions to the residential area by means of diversification. You can diversify the environmental space, and you can introduce things that were not previously the control. So you can transform and create a diversity as well, apart from control or monitoring. What concerns residential areas, so post-war residential areas were built over 5 decades following the Second World War. As a result of industrial development, the cities were growing very rapidly, so they had a high demand for residential areas. As you just heard, 65% of Rigans are living in the residential areas, and these houses amount to almost half of the housing in Riga. So this residential space is a space where lives around 10,000 people, and they are on average 50 hectares big. And Plamniek is a vivid example of that. And usually, they were planned in between 2 main axes or 2 streets, and these residential areas also had school and kindergartens. So the same principles were applied throughout the residential areas. Their architectural appearance was probably different, or architectural solutions were probably different, and parceling principles were probably different as well. Now, as regards to residential areas, the space in residential areas is not or beyond the control of the local residents. What residents indicated is that they have to somehow grit their teeth, and they must be tolerant towards those who are using this space in an appropriate way. This dissatisfaction or they are annoyed by basically inadequate use of this space. So some older people, specifically, who pay great attention to the space where they're living, are greatly concerned and are ready to actively respond to the situation. So this is why I decided to research this situation, or in other words, strengthen the ability of the local residents to control their space according to Oscar's Newman objective, to find the approaches towards the transformation of the residential areas, to make these residential areas attractive and controllable. So the supervision over these areas should not be in the hands of the police, but in the residents themselves. So controlled residential environment is a quality notion based on the Kevin Lynch's definition. So the extent to which it is used by the local residents for work or for the living purposes defines also the use and approach to the transformation of such residential areas, which means that we not only need to have the control on the side of the residents, but also the control stemming from basically the functionality of the residential area and the characteristics of the space. A little more of the theory. So the control has 3 dimensions: coordination, consistency or continuity, and the consensus. So basically, control means that the residents have the control over the space proportionate to their use of the space. What concerns coordination or consensus, the most motivated users of this space should have the security and liberty of treatment of the space. And then the accountability or the responsibility, which basically means that the control of space must evolve along with the competence of the users step by step, and their consensus grows along with the competence. And the third dimension is confidence. People must be, so the control system must be transparent, understandable for the people, and predictable enough from the resident point of view. So there are two ways how we can balance these control dimensions of the users and their right to space, which you should mix with the ownership right. Mix up with the ownership right. Then you have the diagram in the middle. So your right to space is inseparable from your other rights, and it is an integral right, so you can ensure the control of the space if you reach a consensus among the residents, if you provide for peaceful coexistence of the residents, and if you separate the space from time or the general context. So the control is a way of marking the specific area and zoning the specific area or space. So the control of space in residential areas is implemented in two ways: through physical structure, through communications, and through the planning approaches. Joe Halleck offers a model where both of the approaches interact. So the users or residents create the infrastructure, physical infrastructure, on two levels. So there are buildings and the interior with the furniture, whereas public outdoors are being created as a sort of a glue or a welding element between the building. In order to improve this approach, I would like to introduce the notion of the interface, which is acting again as a binding element between various areas, the outdoor space and the physical residential area. So the entrances into the yards would be connected in a single system, and there would be also gates or gateways connecting to residential areas. So access roads have to be designed, and there should be public outdoors in between. What concerns community level, the physical structure of the project would consist of the streets or axes, and the physical space would be consisting of the schools. So most usually people give names to these residential areas, Plavnik and Zolitude. So the borders of these residential areas where shops and where people meet would be the physical borders of these areas. In order to ensure the physical control of the space, people need to intervene within or interact with the space, and I offer three approaches of interaction to the interaction. So the border basically indicates a number of approaches to the secondary facilitation of this area, and there are tools that must coincide with the context, and there should be also ways to improve the walkways.
I selected the Plavnieki 2 in order to conduct my research because this is the most densely populated area. It facilitates up to 400 inhabitants per hectare. It has a spatial composition which has not been completed, and it is related to the control of the inhabitation. Three various approaches can be applied, and for example, the courtyards can be applied, as well as they can be combined with the parking lots, as well as the adjacent space. So, two types of transition spots are possible, and the pedestrian movement is related to the delimitation of the space. These simple principles can be used for developing planning in the scaling 1 to 10,000 or 1 to 2,000. In order to arrive at the opportunity to implement these principles, one has to change the planning process, including various other components, such as research components. Any tasks of planning is to provide a tidy environment movement. But this does not happen as a result, and the initial planning of a microdistrict requires developing a totalitarian space where adding new elements do not shape a functional unity, for example, shopping centers, courtyards, streets, and so on and so forth. So by and large, this planning system, the planning has to be changed to the environmental diagnostics, and the diagnostics can reply to the question, how is this control disseminated in the space? The method of the diagnosis is detected in various works of scholars, and they indicate which are the problems that currently are present, and they help to determine various values, which can actually also be determined when passing through these the spaces, and then you can demark, say, the walking places, the parking lots, the places between them, the greenery, and other places which are not controlled. And similarly, one can assess courtyards like that too, because several courtyards, due to the fact of the configuration, have much more lags than premises or assets. For example, this can be referred to the backs of the buildings or children's playgrounds. Also, in the diagnostics plans, one can follow through the various problems that might exist. And it was stated that, for example, in Plauneki 2, the space for parking is enough if one considers the amount of cars that would be necessary there. But due to the functional and design matters, the number of these parking places needs to be increased, and they are insufficient due to the poor planning. All right, I'm going to address this later on. And it is very important to acquire adequate information on the space user control, as well as to apply quality research methods, for example, the ones that proposed by John Zeisel. For example, indirect monitoring can take the shape of mapping various footpaths, which might speak volumes of how people move. Also, polls can be held in order to understand what is necessary and how things need to be located there. As a result of diagnostics, we acquire a field of problems which consists of 7 clusters of issue situations: for connection, for the shape, for secondary territories, for the management, for the commotion management, and the context. And one of the best ways how to develop this is the pattern language. The patterns are similar to the conditions of behavior, and they present the people and the activities. Basically, this is a double statement which includes both the context as well as the activities and configuration. Patterns are interlinked, and which means that not always problems need to be, sometimes need to be solved in 2 levels. But in order to apply the design or projection of patterns, it is possible to determine the patterns that serve as the basis for the others. This might be the cluster of 3-level or 3-tier patterns. For example, social patterns reflect how things function in these micro-regions. The diagnostical pattern speak volumes of various forms. For example, there are some lines which, as a result of a compositional approach, offer visual approaches for the pedestrians. And the design principles are the result of urban design. And I would like to illustrate this by means of one developed project, which can be possibly used for the development of the stadium territory of Plaunieki. There was this delimitation, and this project would enable to solve the situation. It would also outline which parts would need to be covered with building volumes and which could stay vacated. And construction is provided so that physically long view lines can be finished. And also we needed to design and to determine this cluster of patterns. And yes, as a result, we could shape reasonable relations between the old and the new in places where, for example, the visual links are important. For example, water can be used in order to serve as a link and both as an edge. And this approach was applied in 7 various situations. And the pattern language is an efficient tool in order to unify both the inhabitant, the manager, the owner, and the architect, all in a common language in order to facilitate the sustainable process of dwellings. Everyone can find the variables for each of them in order to shape this common context and at the same time provide room for the diversification. And finally, I would like to present you with my poster. There on the left-hand side, and we can later on discuss it. Thank you.
Paldies, Aleksandr. Paldies, Ade.
Thank you, Aleksandr, and thanks to other speakers who did not exceed the time given to them. Now I would like to give the floor to all of the speakers in order to sit in front here.